But God didn't work alone. You're sitting there thinking you've known the creation story your whole life. Simple, clean, a solitary divine being speaking the universe into existence. But no. The first chapter of the world's first book is rewriting itself beneath your feet. Let's pull the curtain. Let us make man in our image. That bus is not a poetic flourish. It's a whisper of a hidden council, an assembly of divine beings, Elohim. The church has lectured you on one God, one voice. Here, the text reveals a chatter of gods. Now I ask you, did you catch that? Are you listening? The Hebrew word Elohim is plural. You feel the weight of that when you read it, a creator, sure, but with company. Think of it like a board meeting before creation. This isn't mythological fluff, it's encoded in the grammar. So if you believe in a monolithic one and only, you have just one half of the story. Then the narrative shifts, and the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, formed the man of dust. The double name means something. Elohim becomes Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh stepping into the role of chief artisan. Watch how the script cracks. First you have Elohim, plural, overarching creator, then Yahweh, singular, molding the clay. It's like a team hands the project over to one specialist, and the spotlight narrows. Do you feel that shift? It's more than stylistic, it's structural. Two voices, two functions, one story forcefully blended. Picture this, you as the audience, leaning in, wondering what that means. Did the ancient authors try to rewrite the corporate history of the gods into a solo hero myth? Probably. But the scenes show. The council of the gods is still visible behind the plaster. When you sense that, you realize creation wasn't recorded as a one-man job. It was a symposium, and someone tried to edit it into a solo act. Now, let's engage you directly. Did you ever ask, why image of us? If God is one, why us? If the church we go to teaches a solo creator, where does the plural originate? Take a moment and say out loud, in our image. Don't just listen, say it. Feel the echo. Because your modern teaching says in his image, but the text doesn't say that. That plural pronoun is too loud to ignore. I want you probing, who are the us? Are they angels? Divine beings? Something else? The text doesn't label them angels. It says thus and our. When the plural is used, your mind should snap to question mode. Don't gloss over it. That's the dark alley the religious narrative avoided walking down. But you're walking it. Think, too, of the cosmic drama, a council of deities negotiating the fate of man. They decide, let us make man. Then they step back, and Yahweh Elohim builds him. There's almost a handoff. The big meeting is done, now the grunt work. The transition marks a hierarchy. Someone took over operations. Someone else orchestrated the blueprint. That's the tension embedded in the first few chapters. And you, yes you, watching this, do you believe your theology is built on a foundation like that? You took faith at face value. But the text is showing you something raw and unpolished. No filters. No official commentary smoothing the edges. Just the grammar, the narrative shift, the plural pronoun. That's your evidence. Now imagine every Sunday sermon that said God alone made everything. It simplifies, but it erases. It hides the plurality. It transforms the text into a monologue when it was clearly a conversation. You're living in a story that's been edited for comfort. But the original cut? It's messy. It's divine, but with co-workers. Here's another question. If Elohim meant God in singular sense, as it's commonly taught, why did the translators preserve the plural form? The result, English versions say let us and our. That's not accidental. Someone preserved the plural tone. Some voices tried to lighten it, but the plural remains. They left the footprints. They just tried to bury the footprints under carpet. You're lifting that carpet now. What does it mean for you? Ignore that for a moment, just see it. See how the language demands more than one creator voice. See how the story expects a discernment of layers. See how the church's apparatus simplified the dynamic and made it neat. Yet the origin text refuses to be neat. That's dark, because it suggests power structures beyond what's preached. Hidden allies, hidden deities, hidden hierarchy. The church wants you to sit and be compliant. The text wants you to question. You might ask, is this just semantics? Simple grammar? Maybe, but semantics build theology. Grammar scaffolds belief. If the foundational sentence of Scripture is revealing a pantheon, then the institutional monotheism looks like a re-edit. When you lean into that, you're stepping into something dangerous to established systems. You think Genesis is one clean story, right? A perfect divine timeline, heaven, earth, man, woman, paradise. But when you actually read it word for word, it breaks apart like glass. Two different creation sequences, two different tones, two different gods stitched together to look seamless. No one in church tells you this because it blows the illusion of a unified, flawless origin. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Genesis isn't one story, it's two ancient scripts forced to coexist. In the first version, creation unfolds like a cosmic symphony. Everything happens in order: light, sky, sea, land, animals, and finally humans. Man and woman appear together, side by side, born from divine decree. That's Genesis chapter 1. Now jump to Genesis chapter 2 and suddenly everything rearranges. There's no sky dome being crafted, no let there be sequences. Instead, it starts with barren soil, no plants, no rain. Then one creator, now with a specific name, Yahweh Elohim, forms a man from dust, breathes into him, plants a garden, and only then makes animals and woman later. Do you see it? The order flips. It's not a poetic restatement. It's a completely different storyline. Now think about that. Two creation stories, back to back, contradicting each other on basic details, and both included in the same book. Why? Because Genesis wasn't born from one pen. It's a merger of two ancient traditions, one priestly, one older and earthy. One sees God as transcendent, speaking reality into existence from above. The other sees a craftsman, hands in the dirt, sculpting, experimenting, breathing life manually. One belongs to the heavens, the other to the soil. These are not two metaphors for one act, they're rival worldviews forced into a single text by editors who wanted a single religion. Let's break it down like you're watching a movie edit. Scene 1. Divine voice echoing over the void, cinematic, ordered, distant. Scene 2. A solitary artisan kneeling in the dust, molding clay, sweating, breathing spirit. Two directors. Two visions. The cut between Genesis 1 and 2 is the splice line, proof of a rewritten myth. You can almost feel where the scissors went in. Now, ask yourself, why merge them? Because somewhere in history, one group wanted to unify belief, to erase theological diversity. Monotheism needed clean storytelling, not overlapping gods or clashing narratives. When you read the first version, you're hearing the theology of order, hierarchy, perfection. In the second, you're hearing chaos, trial, imperfection. The first God speaks creation, the second experiments with it. The first says, let there be, the second says nothing, he acts, he builds, he adjusts. That second one feels almost human. And that's the part they don't want you to focus on, the version where the divine figure isn't all-powerful, but hands-on, reactive, even uncertain. It's raw and personal, not cosmic. It's God as craftsman, not architect. Watch this detail. In chapter 1, the deity creates man and woman together, equal, simultaneous, both blessed. In chapter 2, the deity makes man first, then woman from his rib. That's not a stylistic flourish, that's a cultural rewrite. The equality of the first story becomes the hierarchy of the second. Someone changed the blueprint of human creation to shift power dynamics. It's right there in plain sight, but no sermon touches it. You see, when religion later declared that man was the original and woman the derivative, it didn't come from science or revelation, it came from this editorial collision. The second version overwrote the first, even though both remain printed side by side. That's the genius of control: leave the evidence visible, but train everyone not to question it. Now here's where it gets more uncomfortable. When scholars looked closer, they noticed that these two stories use different names for God. The first use is Elohim, a plural, majestic, distant force. The second use is Yahweh Elohim, a specific, anthropomorphic deity. That's not random vocabulary. That's an identity shift. The deity evolved from plural to singular, from cosmic to local. It's the birth of a political god, a god with borders, a god who owns land, breath, and loyalty. You're not watching divine revelation, you're watching divine consolidation. And let's push that further. If Genesis was edited to merge two rival traditions, then the God we inherited is already a composite. A fusion of two voices, two mythologies, and two visions of humanity. That's why the tone of Genesis feels so uneven. In one moment, you're watching light and order emerging from divine speech. In the next, you're in a mud workshop with a deity who needs to plant a garden, breathe life into clay, and improvise companionship for his creation. That's not inconsistency, it's history speaking through the seams. Now, pause and visualize this: two ancient storytellers sitting under firelight, each with their version of how everything began. One says, the divine spoke, and it was done. The other says, the divine formed and learned as he went. Centuries later, a group of redactors sits in a temple and says, we'll take both. They don't delete either version, they just line them up and pretend they're one. That's the trick. That's how you engineer a unified religion out of chaos, through fusion, not deletion. Let's get straight to it. The serpent in Genesis wasn't the villain you've been told to fear, it was the trigger that woke humanity up. Forget the Sunday school image of a talking snake tempting an innocent woman into doom. That's not what the text says when you strip away the church's emotional theater. The serpent didn't offer sin. It offered knowledge, awareness, consciousness. That's why this scene terrified theologians for centuries, because it flips the entire hierarchy of divine control. The real crime here wasn't eating a fruit. It was seeing through the illusion. The story unfolds like a psychological experiment. There's a garden, a perfect setup. Two humans, no knowledge of good or evil, no self-awareness, no choice. They're obedient because they don't know any alternative. That's not freedom, that's programming. Then enters the serpent. Calm, articulate, not violent, not demonic, just asking questions. Did God really say that? That's the first spark of skepticism in human history. That's philosophy being born. The serpent doesn't lie, it quotes God directly and challenges interpretation. That's why the institution later had to demonize it. Because that serpent represents inquiry, and inquiry destroys control. Now, pay attention to what happens next. The woman listens, evaluates, and acts. She doesn't fall. She decides. That's the first recorded act of human autonomy. She eats. She gives to the man. And both their eyes open. That phrase, their eyes were opened, is the key. That's not about morality, it's about consciousness expansion. Before that, they didn't even know they were naked. Think about that. They lived unaware of themselves, like children, like AI prototypes running without reflection. The serpent upgrades their software. Suddenly, they perceive. They feel shame, not because they sinned, but because awareness carries the cost of contrast. You recognize yourself as separate. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for traditional theology. God walks into the scene, realizes what happened, and reacts not with patience but with fear. Yes, fear. The line says, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." That's an admission, not a curse. It's the divine counsel acknowledging that humanity has crossed a forbidden threshold. The danger wasn't disobedience, it was competition. Humans now share a divine trait: gnosis, self-awareness, discernment. The system panics. So what does God do? He locks the lab. He bans them from the tree of life so they can't gain immortality too. Translation: they've awakened, now make sure they never evolve further. That's damage control, not divine justice. You can feel the tension in the language. There's no thunderous sermon, no moral reasoning. It's strategic containment. The serpent gave humanity the one tool that could challenge the hierarchy in knowledge. And from that moment, the narrative gets rewritten to make knowledge look like poison. Notice how every major religious system after that repeats the same pattern: don't question, don't seek, don't eat the fruit. Blind faith equals obedience. Critical thought equals rebellion. That's not coincidence, that's inherited architecture from Genesis itself. Let's break down the mechanics of that scene, because the wording matters. The serpent says, "You will not surely die." Then they eat, and what happens? They don't die. The prediction holds. Instead, their reality shifts. So who actually told the truth? The serpent or the deity? It's uncomfortable, but grammatically, the serpent's statement checks out. Death comes much later, symbolic, not instant. So the lie wasn't factual, it was theological. The real deception was making humanity believe that curiosity equals sin. And look at how the woman's role was twisted. The original text doesn't call her evil. She's the seeker. She interacts with the serpent directly, engages the question intellectually, and acts on her own decision. The later doctrine turned her into the scapegoat because her action represents the archetype of rebellion through awareness. The serpent and the woman together embody forbidden wisdom, Sophia and the logos before dogma buried them. Their alliance is the moment the script flips. Creation begins to question its creator. When you read the next verses, you can see how fast control systems activate. God doesn't lecture them about love. He questions them like a ruler interrogating subjects. Who told you that you were naked? The irony, he already knows. The question isn't for information, it's to reassert dominance. That's psychological warfare. The awareness they gained is now reframed as guilt. They're taught to be ashamed of consciousness. That's how you domesticate a newly awakened species, turn their awakening into a source of fear. And then comes the punishment sequence. The serpent is cursed, the woman is told she'll suffer in childbirth, the man will toil. But look closer, none of these are moral verdicts, they're containment strategies. Make survival painful, make awareness costly, make curiosity synonymous with suffering. That's the perfect control loop. Humanity steps out of ignorance and is instantly chained by consequence. It's not justice, it's retaliation. The awakened must pay for waking up. Let's go even deeper. The serpent isn't called Satan anywhere in Genesis. That association came thousands of years later. In the original context, the serpent is a symbol of life, transformation, and cyclical wisdom across every ancient culture surrounding Israel. In Egypt, serpents represented regeneration. In Mesopotamia, they symbolized healing and divine knowledge. The writer knew this. So why insert that imagery? Because even in suppression, the serpent had to be present. The bringer of awareness cannot be erased, only demonized. Right after the awakening, there's a sentence most people skip over, but it's the most revealing line in Genesis. Lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. That one line changes everything. Forget the fruit, forget the snake, this is the real moment of fear. The divine being doesn't say it out loud as a punishment, it's said as a strategy. They've eaten from one tree. We can't let them touch the other. That's not moral outrage, that's panic. The humans had already accessed knowledge, the next step was immortality. And that combination, conscious and eternal, would make them equals. The banishment wasn't justice. It was containment. The moment the humans wake up, they aren't thrown out immediately. There's a pause. a conversation among the divine. The man has become like one of us. That line admits it. There's a council again. Not a single deity thinking in isolation, but a collective realizing a threat. The tone isn't angry, it's defensive. The awakening worked, and now the gate must close. The garden becomes a vault, sealed by fire. Cherubim, those hybrid guardians with wings and flame, are stationed at the entrance. That's not symbolism, that's security protocol. A firewall between the mortal and the eternal. If Eden was paradise, why guard it? Who are they keeping out? Beasts, rebels, or humanity itself? The text is clear, the guards are for humans. The same beings that were supposedly loved and created in the image of the divine are now being blocked with deadly force. That's not the behavior of a nurturing creator, it's the behavior of a ruler protecting classified information. The tree of life wasn't forbidden from the start, it only became restricted after the knowledge tree incident. That means immortality wasn't off limits until humans proved they could think for themselves. Independence triggered the lockdown. You can almost hear the logic inside that divine council, they've already broken containment once. If they gain life everlasting, we lose control forever. That's why the story pivots here, from curiosity to exile. Not because of evil, but because of evolution. The act of eating wasn't sin, it was step 1. The expulsion was step 2, isolation. The gates didn't represent moral boundaries, they represented access denial. Let's get real here, this is the moment where the hierarchy shows its weakness. If the supreme power was all-knowing, why fear humans eating from a tree? You can't fear what you control. Unless creation wasn't entirely under control. Unless this wasn't a perfect system. The wording gives it away, lest he reach out his hand. It's anxiety in divine form. A scrambling reaction, not a decree planned from eternity. You don't lock doors on beings you fully trust. And here's the striking detail everyone overlooks, the tree of life isn't destroyed. It's left standing, guarded, glowing behind that fiery barrier. It's still there, alive, reachable, but forbidden. The text could have easily said the tree was removed or erased, but it doesn't. It remains as temptation, a reminder that immortality was never meant to be annihilated, only restricted. That's not divine wrath, that's resource control. Someone's guarding access to the code of eternity, and they're willing to burn intruders alive to keep it hidden. Now look at the weapon chosen to guard it, a flaming sword that turns every way. That's not poetic imagery, it's a rotating barrier of light, described like plasma, like energy itself. It turns every way, meaning no angle of entry is safe. It's defensive technology written in ancient vocabulary. The writers had no concept of lasers, radiation, or force fields, but the image matches all of them. The divine realm just weaponized fire to secure what humans almost touched. And remember, this happens after the supposed fall. Which means the so-called punishment doesn't kill or annihilate the humans, it simply isolates them from a resource. They still live, multiply, build, evolve. They just can't reach back into Eden. It's not damnation. It's quarantine. The first ever containment zone. The first ever classified zone between species. The gods kept their immortality proprietary. Now let's talk about why that detail terrified theologians. Because if immortality was a fruit hanging on a tree, that means it was a thing, not a trait. It could be taken, transferred, consumed. That breaks the idea of divine exclusivity. It means eternity wasn't inherent to the gods, it was stored somewhere, harvestable. Humanity's sin wasn't moral, it was technical. They accessed one resource and got locked out of the second. Genesis becomes less a story about obedience and more about data access, who controls it, who's allowed in, who gets erased. Notice how, from that point on, every divine encounter in the Old Testament happens outside the garden. The gates stay closed. The place of origin becomes mythic, unreachable. It's as if humanity got permanently firewalled from the original server. The presence of God withdraws, becomes remote, fragmented, conditional. And the guardians? They are never dismissed. They remain. The cherubim become recurring symbols, seen later in temple architecture, the Ark of the Covenant, even the throne visions of prophets. The guards of Eden become the sentinels of divine secrecy. Their job didn't end with Adam and Eve. Their job is to ensure no one breaches the boundary again. Now we enter the part the church has spent centuries trying to sanitize, the moment when heaven crossed its own line. Genesis 6 doesn't open with commandments or morals. It opens with a scandal. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took them as wives. That's not metaphor. That's contact. That's the divine mingling with the human. You can dress it up however you want, but it's clear something from above came down and altered the bloodline of earth. The text doesn't say angels. It doesn't say spirits. It calls them sons of God. That's the same phrase used earlier for the divine council. They weren't demons. They weren't metaphorical. They were entities, powerful, luminous, hybrid intelligences who decided to break rank and reproduce with humanity. The result? Giants. Nephilim. The mighty men of old, men of renown. These weren't fairy tale monsters. They were the offspring of a forbidden union, half divine, half mortal, a living violation of cosmic boundaries. You can almost hear the reaction from above: outrage, fear, cover-up. The tone of Genesis shifts completely. It goes from calm genealogies to panic mode. My spirit shall not always strive with man. Translation: the balance is broken. The divine realm just contaminated its own experiment. The rulers of heaven see the infection spreading, hybrids, strength beyond measure, knowledge not meant for mortals, and they pull the alarm. This is the trigger for the flood. Not human sin, not corruption of morals, but a genetic crisis. Think about it logically. If this was just about moral decay, why erase the entire biosphere? Why destroy everything that breathes? That's overkill. But if the bloodline itself had been tainted, if the children of heaven had physically altered the DNA of creation, then a reset makes sense. That's not punishment, that's containment. The flood isn't a moral event. It's a sterilization event. A reboot to erase the hybrid offspring. Now, watch the word choice again. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward. Also afterward. That line shouldn't exist if the flood was total. But it's there. Meaning some of them survived. Some bloodline carried through. Which tells you this wasn't a clean purge. It was damage control. The system failed to fully erase the evidence. And those fragments of the divine human mix echo in later myths: Anakim, Rephaim, Titans, demigods. Every ancient culture talks about them because they were real enough to leave a global memory. The church later tried to collapse all of this into allegory. They said the sons of God were just men from Seth's line marrying women from Cain's line. But that interpretation collapses instantly when you read the phrasing. No genealogy, no tribe is ever called sons of God. That's a title reserved for heavenly beings throughout the Hebrew texts. And the result of their union isn't ordinary offspring, it's giants, beings of enormous size and power. That's not what happens when two human families intermarry. That's genetic language written in mythic code. Let's pause and dissect this scene like investigators. Step 1, the divine beings saw human women. Step 2, they took them. That word took is not poetic, it's physical. It's the same verb used for seizing, claiming, impregnating. Step 3, offspring are born, and they're described not by morality, but by power, men of renown. That's how ancient texts describe beings worshipped as gods. So in one verse, Genesis just admits that the world's pantheons, Greek, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, all trace back to a single rebellion of divine beings who bred with humans. Now here's the part nobody dares to emphasize. These Nephilim were described as heroes of old. That means humanity didn't see them as abominations. They were admired, worshipped, probably ruling cities, teaching arts, warfare, magic, mythology. They were gods to early mankind. And that worship enraged the higher order. You're seeing the origin of forbidden religion, the moment when man started worshipping the offspring of heaven instead of heaven itself. You can feel how the tone of Genesis 6 drips with paranoia. The author is trying to frame it as corruption, but he can't erase the fascination. These weren't monsters, they were the apex of creation. The line in Men of Renown isn't condemnation, it's grudging acknowledgement. Even the writer knew their legend was unstoppable. That's why the flood was framed as divine necessity, not moral judgment. The earth was filled with violence. That violence isn't about crime, it's about domination. The hybrids became rulers. Earth became a playground of gods in flesh. When the water finally comes, it's not just to kill humans, it's to erase divine fingerprints. But here's the twist, the text says the Nephilim were on the earth afterward. Meaning whatever mechanism wiped them didn't erase the lineage completely. The giants appear again later, in Numbers, Deuteronomy, and even in David's time. Goliath himself is described as one of them. That means the divine interference continued quietly even after the flood. Someone kept playing with the code. After the flood, everything is supposed to be clean, pure, renewed, divine order restored. But the text doesn't start with peace. It starts with fear. It starts with memory. The first thing the survivors do isn't celebration, it's sacrifice. Smoke rising into the sky like a signal to the same power that just drowned the world. That's the unspoken tension of Genesis. After the flood, humanity's back, but not because of mercy, because the system needs them. The flood didn't end the story, it reset control. The narrative looks like it's beginning fresh, but if you listen closely, it's glitching. God says he won't destroy the earth again. Sounds like grace, right? But the next line admits something darker, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Meaning nothing changed. The experiment failed, but it's still being allowed to run. Why? Because complete destruction would end the energy source. Humanity, flawed, chaotic, unpredictable, is still the battery. The reset wasn't for purity, it was to stabilize production. And the moment that structure stabilizes, power consolidates. Watch what happens right after. Noah becomes a priest-king. His sons become the new founders of nations. The same hierarchy reboots, divine authority above, rulers below, laborious beneath. And just when you think the world's purified, the cracks open again. Genesis starts listing names, lines, bloodlines, descendants. But hidden in that list is an echo, the sons of Anak, the Rephaim, the mighty ones. The same hybrid vocabulary sneaks back in. Meaning the so-called purge didn't delete the infection. It went underground. The Nephilim bloodline survived. Also afterward. The writers had to admit it. The gods didn't leave, they just rebranded. Then comes one of the most chilling scenes in the entire ancient text, Noah's drunken collapse. Everyone skips over it, but that moment is code. This isn't just a drunk man lying naked in his tent. It's a symbolic reboot of the Eden story, another forbidden sight, another act of shame, another curse that defines generations. Ham sees the nakedness of his father. In ancient idiom, that phrase doesn't just mean looking, it means uncovering something sacred, forbidden, or sexually charged. Whatever actually happened in that tent, it was serious enough for Noah to curse Ham's entire bloodline. That's not about drinking. That's about power, inheritance, access to divine knowledge, or worse, a breach of boundaries that mirrored the original fall. The post-flood world is already fracturing. Next, the narrative shifts focus to the rise of cities, Babylon, Assyria, Nineveh. Human civilization explodes with architecture, trade, empire. But notice the irony, the flood supposedly wiped away corruption, and now the first project humanity undertakes is to build a tower that reaches to heaven. The flood didn't cleanse ambition, it compressed it. The instinct to ascend, to reach divine space, to reclaim what was stolen at Eden and forbidden by the gods, that instinct never died. It just changed tools. The Tower of Babel isn't rebellion, it's retaliation. It's humanity trying to claw back access to the sky, the same realm that locked them out. And once again, the reaction from above is panic. Behold, the people are one, and they have one language. Now nothing they plan will be impossible for them. That's a direct quote. It's a confession of fear. The same divine anxiety that locked the gates of Eden flares up again. Unity equals danger. Knowledge equals threat. Progress equals revolt. So the command comes down, confuse their language, scatter them. Translation, divide and rule. That's how you keep power, fragment communication. Don't destroy them, just make sure they can't cooperate. The flood didn't destroy humanity. Babel broke its mind. You can see the pattern emerging: rebellion, awakening, reaction, reset. Over and over. Eden, Nephilim, flood, Babel. Every time humans rise, the system tightens the leash. It's not morality, it's management. The divine keeps trying to limit human capacity, while humans keep reaching further than they're allowed. It's not good versus evil, it's control versus evolution. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. The genealogies after Babel start naming regions, tribes, and kings that don't fit the previous pattern. Some are described as if men of renown. Some territories are said to belong to the giants. The implication is that the post-flood world wasn't just human. Something hybrid persisted, something powerful enough to dominate cities and lineages. The so-called pure human race was never pure again. The divine contagion remained in the blood. And the more you read, the clearer it becomes. Genesis isn't about a perfect creation broken by sin. It's about a chaotic world repeatedly reset by rival gods trying to maintain dominance. The flood wasn't the end of corruption, it was the start of control through fear. Babel wasn't punishment, it was linguistic sabotage. Every divine act in these early chapters reads less like salvation and more like enforcement. The texts aren't describing a loving overseer, they're describing a territorial ruler watching his subjects evolve too fast. Even the very idea of covenant that follows later, Noah's rainbow, the symbol of peace, isn't peace. It's a contract under surveillance. I will remember my covenant, the deity says, not you will. It's a self-reminder, not a promise. A leash written in color across the sky. The flood, the covenant, the scattering, it's a full-spectrum containment policy. And if you trace the rhythm, it always comes back to the same formula: knowledge, power, suppression, rewrite. Humans wake up, gods panic, the text reframes the event as sin. It's the same template from Eden, just scaled up for civilization. That's what makes the early chapters of Genesis so volatile. They're not history. They're damage reports from an ongoing war between awakening and authority. You can sense the anxiety even in the silences, the missing lines, the sudden shifts, the strange insertions. The editors left clues they couldn't erase: stray plurals, contradictory chronologies, fragments of older myths bleeding through. The sanitized story we read today is a controlled narrative, stitched together from rebellion, rewritten by survivors, and rebranded as divine order. Every pattern of suppression, every panic response, every cover-up begins here. The aftermath of the flood is not a story of salvation, it's a manual on containment. The gods won the flood, but they lost the secret. Humanity remembers just enough to keep asking the forbidden questions. Thank you for watching till the end, really, thank you for staying through this deep dive into what's hidden beneath the text. If you're still here, you've already stepped outside the walls they built.